It is so good to be with you today. I'd like to start off very, very quickly by introducing my family. That is my wife, Leah. Leah is also a pastor, and we've had fun pastoring all over the place. And our two boys, Roman on the left and Lance on the right, as you can see, the two most adorable things on the face of the planet. So they send their greetings all the way from sunny and warm California. So here's what we're going to be doing this morning. We're going to be talking about advertising. Now, what's interesting about advertising is that it's trying to find its place in a very, very, very fast-changing world, especially when we talk about the introduction of the social media and how that affects traditional advertising. And what we're going to be talking about today is essentially Advertising 101. I've subtitled this thing, Old School is Still in Session, right? Because what we're finding out more and more and more is that even though we find ourselves in this emerging culture, even though the norms for communication are changing every single day, some of the anchor points of advertising and marketing that we've known to be true for at least 60 or 70 years are still very, very, very much true about the way people interact and receive and transmit messages in the world in which we live. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, Advertising 101, Old School Still in Session, and we're going to be doing several things. We're going to be looking at three principles, just so you can kind of have a mental roadmap for where we're going. We're going to be looking at three principles, one result, and then one catalyst, right? Three principles, one result, and one catalyst that can, by the way, be applied to any situation. Any situation. So whether you are a pastor here in a local church setting, whether you're here representing some form of governance in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a conference, a union, a division, whether you're a local business owner, whether you're a member in a local church and you're a ministry leader, it doesn't matter which context you find yourself in. Today we're going to be talking about principles, right, rather than specific methodology that you can begin to apply across the board. So let's launch right into it with the very, very first thing that Advertising 101, Madison Avenue, at least on our end of the pond, Madison Avenue, New York City, has been teaching for at least 60 to 70 years, right? The very, very first one is you must have a unique selling proposition. You must have a unique selling proposition. So whatever your product is, in the context of our meeting here today, our product happens to be the message of Christ, or more appropriately, Christ himself, right? So let me ask you a question. The church as a marketer, do we have a product to sell, and are we offended even to put it in those terms, right? I would offer this morning that we actually do have a product to sell, and that our product is a proposition. Does anyone know what John chapter 10 and verse 10 says? To me, that is the core proposition of Christianity, what Jesus came to quote-unquote sell us, in other words, to offer us, and what we then in turn are offering to the world. John 10:10 says this, I have come to give you what? Life, and to give you what? Life more abundantly. That is the proposition that we as Christians are putting out there into the marketplace of ideas to say that Jesus offers life and life more abundantly. Now, that is our so-called product as Christians, but again, you can boil this down to any product that you are selling or offering or promoting in any context. The number one rule is you must have a unique selling proposition, right? You know what this means? Number one, that you've got to rise to the surface in a very, very crowded marketplace. And second of all, that you've got to know why you're selling something to begin with, why you're offering a certain product to begin with. We were just referencing Steve Jobs, who came back to Apple and said the reason that you're failing is you don't know why you're building the products that you're building. You don't know why you're selling what you're selling. So advertising and effective advertising for many, many years has drilled into us, you have to have a unique selling proposition. Now, how do we do this? There are three ways that we're going to talk about today. Number one, and you see it up there, you have to have a compelling story. It is not enough to sell a product based on the virtues of its features. You must have a compelling story that drives the reason that a person would want to even have an interest in what you're offering them to begin with. So have a compelling story. I'll never forget, we were on a panel in Salt Lake City at the Society of Adventist Communicators, and one of the panelists was the religion editor of the newspaper there in Salt Lake City, the religion editor. And somebody asked this religion editor, obviously not a Seventh-day Adventist Christian, asked her, listen, what do you look for as a religion editor in the stories that you accumulate and ultimately that make its way onto the pages of the newspaper there in Salt Lake City? And she said, I am interested in stories about people who just happen to be fill in the blank. In the end, you realize that Salt Lake City is sort of the epicenter of the Mormon faith. And she said to us, listen, I look for stories about people who just happen to be Mormons. So to you I say, if you want to get my interest as a religion editor in a paper, I'm interested in compelling stories about people who just happen to be Seventh-day Adventist Christians. Right? So in the end, what we're talking about here is if we want to be effective in promoting whatever it is that we are attempting to promote, we have to have a unique selling proposition. And the first way to do that effectively is by having a compelling story that drives the purpose for the product, that drives the purpose for the idea, not just a set of features that we think are really, really great. So then it is not enough to have a mission. You have to have a compelling way to communicate that vision, and there is no more powerful way, especially in the world in which we live today, than the narrative, than the story that drives the purpose for the product or the purpose for the idea. Think about it, though, the power of story and the power of having a compelling story. What did Jesus use most often to teach principles and facts? What is it? Stories, parables, right? Think about the Old Testament. So you think, yeah, but think about the Old Testament. The Old Testament, like think about the book of Numbers and Leviticus. Man, you drown in facts and figures. Right, but look at how God chooses to communicate through his prophets many times. Yes, you can read through the book of Jeremiah and sort of drown in a number of different words and so on and so forth. But if you scan the Old Testament, you realize that God calls these prophets and then has them be actors many times, and has them become living metaphors so that through this living metaphor, he can communicate in the form of story, in the form of narrative, much more effectively than the prophet would ever communicate, were he just to stand on a soapbox in the town square and communicate it. Can you think of a couple of them? I'll give you a couple while you're thinking. Hosea is asked to marry a what? A prostitute. And to go through the motions, and to let her go, and to have her come back. Why? Hosea is now a living metaphor. Hosea becomes a living story for what God wants to communicate, right? You can think of a few more, I'm sure. Ezekiel, remember when he was asked to lay on his side? I have no idea how he made it through that, 40 days laying on his side. Okay, so then think about the nation of Israel. When we think about the nation of Israel in the Old Testament, it is not simply a historic account. God himself chooses a nation and turns them into a story for an effective model of what? His plan of salvation. So we come back to advertising, marketing. It is the same concept that we've been taught for many, many years. Have a unique selling proposition, and to drive that selling proposition, have a story and know what your story is. Moving on to the second one. Oh, by the way, I should say this. Don't ever get lost in the story to the detriment of the actual message, right? Or the actual product. Let me put it another way. Don't ever let the story drown out or overwhelm the product. I'll give you a perfect example of this. Sometime in the 90s, a commercial aired on television in the United States that I remember to this day. In fact, it is my favorite commercial of all time. There's a boss, and then there are two sort of employees walking behind the boss, and they're walking very rapidly to a meeting. And the boss says to the first guy behind him, He says, Johnson, do you have what we need? Right? And they're walking very, very quickly through this corporate headquarters. And Johnson says to him, don't worry, sir, I've got it all up here. Right? The second he says, I've got it all up here, they round the corner and somebody has left a file drawer open right at the height of his head. They said, don't worry, sir, I've got it all up here. They turn the corner and bam, right into the file cabinet, and he is down, unconscious on the floor. Right? They go then, they break in the commercial to whatever product they are actually pitching, and then they come back, and you can see the boss, he's now in the board meeting, and he's got his head in his hands, and he's thinking, okay, I am up a creek here, because we don't have what we need. The second guy, remember there was a second guy, comes up to him and basically leans down, he puts his hand on the edge of the table, and he whispers into his boss's ear, don't worry, sir, he told me everything. And the second he says that, his hand slips from the table, and he bangs his head on the side of the table, and he's out, right? Love that commercial, and it has stayed with me now for over 10 years. But you know what? I have no idea what the product was. I have no idea what they were trying to sell with the commercial. The story was so good, right? And it ingrained itself in my mind, but I have no idea what they were selling. So be careful so that you don't get totally lost in the method of promotion, that you lose the actual element of what you're promoting to begin with, right? So don't let it overwhelm it. So let's go then to the second one very quickly. Number one, have a unique selling proposition. How do we do that? We have a compelling story. The second way is by having a strong position for your product. Do you have a strong position for your product? You know what this means? Do you have a great product? And have you been honest with yourself about whether your product is really good? And is it even great, right? In other words, if you have a great product, you can then compete in the marketplace. Whatever the marketplace is, the marketplace of ideas, the marketplace of resources, if we have a great product, in other words, if we have a strong position, and by the way, you know what this means? Do you have a competitive advantage? You know what Warren Buffett calls it? Do you have a moat, right? Do you have a moat around your product? Something that can't easily be crossed. Does your product have enough competitive advantage to be able to compete in the marketplace? This is, once again, not rocket science, and it is not new stuff that has been discovered at the Harvard Business School. These are elements of effective advertising that have been around for many, many, many decades. Do we have a strong position to our product? Let me ask you a couple of questions. How well do we as Adventist Christians compete in the marketplace of ideas? How strong is our product? Have we been honest with ourselves about all aspects of our product? Have we done an honest SWOT analysis? Have you ever seen these SWOT? The strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities and threats that surround a product, a SWOT analysis. Have we been honest with ourselves about our product? Do we have a product that can compete in the marketplace of ideas, or are we too busy competing with ourselves? So let me ask you a question as communicators, professional communicators, communication enthusiasts, media professionals. When you benchmark yourself to say, okay, how are we doing in our school, in our conference, in our local church, do you look at other Adventist resources? And do you benchmark yourself against other Adventist schools or Adventist conferences or Adventist churches or magazines? Or do you every so often step outside of that bubble and begin to compare what you're doing to the world at large and begin to ask the question, is this product compelling enough, great enough, unique enough to compete in the marketplace of ideas outside of our small, limited bubble? That's the question that we're asking here. Does our product as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, whatever that may be, does it have a strong position, not amongst ourselves, but amongst the residents of this planet? Amongst the other competitors for the hearts and minds of men and women. Okay? So, there's a third element to this, having a unique selling proposition. How do we actually have a unique selling proposition? By having a compelling story, by having a strong position, and by understanding our audience. By understanding our audience. By the way, this is Relationships 101. If you've ever been in a relationship, if you are in a relationship, you recognize clearly that the first step to effective communication is understanding the person that you are communicating with and tailoring your response to that individual. Yes or no? Absolutely. So how do we then have a unique selling proposition? By understanding who we are, and don't get lost in the term, who we are propositioning. By understanding the audience that we are facing. By understanding those whom ultimately we want to reach. But this, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is where in our community of faith, we have a bit of a problem. Because we love our product too much. And we say, you know, our product is great because we have the truth. Our product is amazing because we have an incredibly rich history. Our product is phenomenal because we've got this global community. And we've never, I shouldn't say never, we've hardly ever stopped to say, but does anyone care? Do we understand the people to whom we are attempting to say, we have a great product? Relationships 101. Have we understood the person in front of us first and then tailored our response, tailored our approach based on understanding that individual? And so what we do, and I speak from experience, is we say, surely all we have to do is put it out there. Surely all we have to do is advertise it. Surely all we have to do is open the doors of the church and they will all come streaming in. We love our product a little bit too much. So, in your context, have you stopped first to understand your audience so that when you begin to craft your unique selling proposition, it is not just based on your own internal vision of how great you think your product is, but it is based on a fluent understanding of the people you are actually trying to reach with that particular product? Do we have a deep understanding of our audience? And by the way, if you want an organic way to get there, I'm going to ask you a second and then a third question. And this is a truly organic way to get to a deep understanding of your audience. Do we have a genuine appreciation of our audience? Here's the third question. Do we have a deep love for our audience? Whomever they may be, whatever profile they may fit, whatever lifestyle they may choose to live their life by. If we start there, very quickly we will end up at having a deep understanding of our audience. Okay, so then those are the questions to consider, and I'll tell you why. Take a look at these three statements that I've brought for you here. Why is it important that we have a deep understanding of the people that we are trying to reach with whatever we are trying to promote? Look at the first one. People don't read ads. They read what interests them, and sometimes it's an ad. Second one. People buy two things: good feelings and solutions to problems. People buy two things, good feelings and solutions to problems. Number 3, people don't buy things, people buy what things can do for them. People buy what things can do for them. Tidbits that I've picked up along the way here and there from others and from observation. So, what are all of these things saying? They're saying this, that we as individuals receive and interpret and appreciate messages through our own personal and unique filters. The question is this: we as originators of communication, we as advertisers, we as promoters of something that we believe in, have we crafted those messages in such a way as for them to pass through these filters? Why? Because we truly understand the filters for that particular people group, even for that particular person, right? Okay, so then, very, very quickly moving on, the very first leg, if we were to sort of build a table here together, the very first leg of Advertising 101 is have a unique selling proposition. Moving on very, very quickly to the second one, which is essentially reach and frequency. Again, reach and frequency as a concept in advertising. By the way, if you're furiously writing down those 3, talk to me later and I'll be happy to share them with you. Reach and frequency is another concept that has been around for decades and has been another leg in Advertising 101 theory and approach for many, many years. These are Siamese twins and they cannot be separated. Notice what I said. You cannot just choose reach or frequency. It must always be reach and frequency. And let's talk about what these two things are. Number 1, let's talk about reach. Reach addresses the fact that in order for you to be successful in promoting or advertising, whatever you're promoting or advertising, you must reach the right amount of people. You must reach the right amount of people. Now, if your vision is to reach one person, then you ought to reach one person. But many times, our goal is to reach many different kinds of people, and so reach essentially says, make sure that you are reaching enough people, and essentially what this is saying is that the right amount of people have to be exposed to your message in order for it to gain momentum. Right? In order for it, as Malcolm Gladwell, the popular author says, in order for it to reach a tipping point, the right amount of people have to grab onto what you're selling so that this tipping point is reached, and then everything is downhill from there in a positive way. There's a self-sustaining momentum that then becomes a reality, whether we're talking about a movement or whether we're talking about a product or whatnot. So, that's the first element of reach, reaching the right amount of people. But here's the second aspect to reach, reaching the right people. Reaching the right people. By the way, we as Christians, and then more specifically as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, we are enamored with the Great Commission. And the Great Commission found toward the end of the book of Matthew is a tremendous call, to action. But we're enamored with it because of one thing. We say that go into where? All the what? World. So we as Seventh-day Adventist Christians are very global in our perspective, in our worldview, which could be a good thing, but we get lost in it, I will suggest to you this morning, to the detriment of understanding that we can never reach every single person in the same way, right? So essentially, you have to also calculate very carefully in reaching the right amount of people. Are we reaching the right kind of people with this particular message or this particular product or this particular approach? Are we reaching enough of them, and are we reaching the right kind of people that this particular message or this particular approach is going to effectively intersect with? That is the concept of reach. And by the way, realize we're making no value judgments here. We're talking about groups of people, right, that will react positively, or should I say react more effectively to a particular methodology or a particular message. We're matching the right products to the right people. A very, very quick example of this, when I had the chance in Dallas, Texas, to serve as a senior pastor, one of the first things that I did was just to kind of survey the community, survey like a 2-mile radius. And one of the things that my wife Leah and I noticed was that we were surrounded by art galleries. And we were very close to the AT&T Performing Arts Center and the Winspear Opera House. I mean, we were a football's throw away from all of these things. And we said, wow, this is the language of this community. This is an artistic community. And so together with the leadership of the local church there, we launched an annual celebration of the arts. The 3rd year into the celebration of the arts, we had over 150 pieces of diverse art. You name the medium, it was submitted. Over 150 pieces of art submitted to this art festival, Celebration of the Arts, at a local church near downtown Dallas, right, which is where we were located. And most of those pieces were submitted by people who were not part of our community of faith, right? In other words, they were not Seventh-day Adventist Christians, and many of them were not even Christians at all. They had seen it advertised. Our members had invited them to participate. And then the judges, sort of the curators of the exhibit as well, were there and were not, again, from our community of faith, but were from the Dallas Art Institute, from various that we asked to come in. It was a tremendously successful thing. Why? Because in the end, we understood that we were reaching the right amount of people. And then specifically, we were reaching the right kind of people in our 2-mile radius around that church. So let's get very quickly to the second one, reach and frequency. Reach and frequency. Why are they Siamese twins? Because we have to reach the right amount of people, and here's the catch. We have to reach them a number of different times before the message sinks in. We have to reach the right amount of people numerous times with the same message. Why? Let me share with you a very quick quote. Take a look on the screen. This is from an author, Kenneth Wesson, who says, "We constantly perceive vast amount of information each minute, but we make no attempt to recall very much of it. Equally important, we cannot remember information that we fail to encode from memory storage in the first place." So as advertisers, as marketers, as promoters of ideas that we believe in or products that we believe in, we have to understand a little bit about how the brain works, right? It's not about just what looks great on paper. It's not just about great design, which I am an enormous champion of. It is about understanding brain function and understanding brain science. Now, I certainly don't speak as a neuroscientist, but I can tell you a couple of things about how the brain works that I'm sure you already know. Our brains are malleable, okay? They call it brain plasticity. And what that means is that our brains are constantly able to change the way they operate in terms of thoughts, in terms of perceptions. And so an easy way to think about it is in terms of a muddy road. If you have a muddy road and it has just rained last night and everyone is still sleeping, the first person to drive over that muddy road creates a what? A set of tire tracks. The next person comes out of their house, goes over the tire tracks, and what happens to the impressions in the dirt? They get what? Deeper and deeper. As more cars go over that muddy road, that dirt road, the impressions get deeper. That's exactly how our minds work. So here are the two ways in which those impressions, which by the way become memories, which by the way become biases and filters through which we perceive the world. This is how we construct our worldview, are through these impressions, this muddy road that gets deeper and deeper and deeper. There are two ways that happens. Number one is through severe trauma. That can only happen once, but it stays with you for the rest of your life. Where were you on the morning of September 11th, 2001? Right? Where were you? And then you fill in the blank for some traumatic event that happened in your life. You can remember the room that you were in. You can remember the smells. You can remember what you said right before and right after. That is trauma. That is that is the type of event that causes shock, and immediately it's almost like a semi-truck drives over that road. That's the first way. But that doesn't happen very often. More than not, the second way that our brain creates these impressions is through repeated exposure. Smaller cars going over that road again and again and again and again and again. And before long, you've formed a memory. The memory turns into a thought. The thought turns into a perspective. The perspective turns ultimately, together with others, into a world view. So, frequency in reach and frequency in terms of advertising says you cannot simply reach the right amount of people one time. You cannot simply reach them 2 times and say, guess what? We had 1 million impressions on whatever. We had 1 million views on our YouTube video. If they only saw it once, unless it was really traumatic, unless it was really shocking, guess what's going to happen? They're not going to remember it very well. Because that same day, they will have, whoever it is, will have been exposed to many, many, many other forms of stimulus. So what we have to do as advertisers, we have to understand that it's a matter of combining reach, in other words, the right amount of people and the right people, with numerous exposures to the same message. Once we combine those two, the effect is actually very, very powerful. I want to share with you very, very quickly a couple of examples in graphical form. This, again, is Dallas, Texas, where we most recently lived. This, if you were to round that corner, downtown is right there. The skyscrapers are right around that corner. So this is downtown traffic. I took this on a Saturday morning, and so you don't see what's quite normally representative of this particular piece of the highway. It is normally a parking lot. Literally a parking lot. You're moving at most 5 miles an hour as you're inching your way toward work. And here's the very, very interesting thing about these 3 billboards that you see here. All these 3 billboards are advertising the very same product. These 2 here are identical. They're Samsung Galaxy phones. And then this third one was a company that decided, and knowing the idea of reach and frequency, decided to also market, this is a carrier, Metro PCS, also advertised the very same phone, Samsung PCS. And for almost a year, believe it or not, these 3 billboards were like that. Why? Because you're creeping along and you're seeing one. About 20 minutes later, you've advanced half a mile, and you see the other one, and then the third one. It is the concept of reach. Then if you were to go around the side to downtown, instantly you would see 3 buildings in downtown that all face each other, and Apple computers, for the span of, I'd say, 3 years, I think they're still there, had those 3 buildings decked out in 3 different ads for an Apple product. Why would they do this? Because they understand that it's not just about one billboard. It's not just about one handbill. It's not just about one invitation or one social media ad. It's about multiple times exposing the mind, remember that muddy road, multiple times exposing the brain to a particular message. Let me tell you about another one, okay? Let's go back before I show you it. We have convenience stores in the United States. I understand you guys here have the same type of thing. You go to a gas station, and then associated with that gas station is a store where you can buy various things. Well, in the United States, the convenience stores do not have a great reputation. In fact, they have a horrible reputation because they're dirty and they're stinky. And all you want to do is pay for your fuel and maybe grab a drink, and then you're out of there. And you certainly don't want to go to the where? Restroom, the toilet, the bathroom, in a convenience station in the United States of America. Yuck, right? Just one of those realities. Along comes a company, and they call themselves Buc-ee's, from a beaver, right? Bucky the beaver. And they create the most amazing convenience store experience that you could ever imagine. Think about the highest end department store in your particular nation or in your particular community. The highest end department store. Well, this is the equivalent in Texas of the highest end convenience store you can possibly ever imagine. When you walk into Buc-ee's, it is enormous. The Buc-ee's is 3 times the size of this room. So you can imagine, 3 times the size of this room. When you go to the toilets or the restrooms or the bathrooms, do you know how many individual stalls? I know this is a TMI, but too much information. But take a guess as to how many, once you walk into the bathroom, how many unique stalls there are on either the ladies or the men's side. You know how many? 45. And the bathroom, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I am not being evangelistic this morning. The bathrooms are so clean that you can eat a picnic on the floor with your family and be just fine. No antiseptic solution needed, right? They have branded themselves as the top of the line, and we've never, ever driven from Dallas to Houston. By the way, there are only select number of these throughout Texas. And one is between Dallas and Houston. We've never driven to one without it being packed, jam-packed every time we go. They have hit the nail on the head. Now, do they have, based on what I just told you, do they have the best product in the market, yes or no? Yes, they do. And believe me, they do. Would they need to have any form of real advertising? Or do you think that by now they've hit a tipping point where most of that is just self-sustained through word of mouth? Yes or no? No. Exactly. Because on the highways, you will see, and I brought you a few things, that Buc-ee's advertises as far as 797 miles away. And what happens is, as you're working toward Buc-ee's, you see these billboards again and again and again and again. And you've got some crafty guys and gals in a back room somewhere coming up with some of these things. I put the more sort of friendly ones up here. Some say the best beef jerky ever, 797 miles, 262 miles, only 262 miles to Buc-ee. You can hold it, right? And believe me, if you saw the bathrooms, you'd want to hold it, right? It is like a luxury experience. Next one, right? OMG, LOL, it's a beaver, right? I have no idea, but they think it's funny. 120 miles. Let's go back 32 miles. Never drive on an empty stomach. And here's another 32 miles. Your throne awaits. Fabulous restrooms, right? And then finally, here you are, 2 words, homemade fudge, free samples, by the way. Next exit, right? You see this wherever there's a Buc-ee's, you have then reach because people are driving like mad along these highways, and frequency because they're driving you crazy all the way until you get to Buc-ee's, where you have to go to Buc-ee's, right? You must go to Buc-ee's. So even the best product on the market does not rely on the reputation of its product. It understands that it constantly has to interact with the general population in terms of reach and frequency. Okay, moving along very, very, very quickly. By the way, how does reach and frequency affect our understanding of social media advertising? It is an incredible thing that Facebook did in releasing some information that you may or may not have seen. So here's what most of us got very enamored with a few years ago. It's called the click-through rate. So you place an ad on a social media site, and you come back to your administrators and you say to them, we have a 33% click-through rate. Do you know what that means? That 1/3 of the people who saw our ad clicked on it. Isn't that amazing? And the executives sign off on a bigger budget and go ye therefore, and bring us back higher click-through rates. Here's what by the way, that's the inside of a Buc-ee's. I'm sorry you can't see it very well. It's enormous. That's my panorama thing on my iPhone, right? It's just enormous. Okay, so take a very, very close look. I'm going to read this to you verbatim so you can see it clearly and understand it clearly. This is from Brad Smallwood. Look at right there. Brad Smallwood is the vice president at Facebook. The vice president, let me get this right. Here it is. The vice president for measurements and insights. The VP for measurements and insights. This guy should know what he's talking about in terms of Facebook. And here's what he wrote publicly. They made this sort of confession, Facebook did. It says, a 0.07% correlation, less than 1% correlation between high click-through rates and actual sales. Less than a 1% correlation. In other words, Facebook started to say, don't get excited about the click-through rates. Look at what they said. 99% of sales generated from the online branding ad campaign came from consumers who saw the ads but didn't interact with them. 99%. And here's where Brad Smallwood finishes. Maximized reach, what word did he just say? Reach. Maximized reach generated an average of 70% higher return on investment than those that didn't, and campaigns that maximize, what's the next word? Frequency. You see that? Reach and frequency had a 40% higher ROI. What is Facebook saying? Facebook is saying, listen, as people are exposed to a message multiple times, it registers, it forms an impression, and they then will act on it later many times. In other words, they say, look, don't get caught up in the metrics of social media advertising too much. Understand psychology, that if you put reach and frequency into your ad campaigns, even on social media, it will result in action at a later time. All right, very, very quickly as we close, the media mix is then the third one. So we've gone over, have a unique selling proposition. Reach and frequency was the second leg of Advertising 101. The media mix is the third one. And what we do there is we combine advertising channels and platforms to reach multiple audiences. Let me ask you a question. Where do you see Coke and BMW advertised? Where? Everywhere, yeah. Maybe a better question is, where don't you see Coke and BMW advertised? Why do they advertise in so many, many diverse places? I'll do this by asking a question. Okay, how many of you get your news? How many of you get your news from a traditional paper, right? The kind you can still put under your arm. Raise your hand. Don't be embarrassed, please. I'll raise my hand first. I'm a newspaper guy, okay? There's like a few of you. Some of you are like this, you know, right? How many of you get your news from a news website, right? CNN.com, all right? Excellent. How many of you get your news from social media sites, from Facebook, right? From people forwarding, right? Okay, there's some of you who are like, yeah, okay, maybe, yeah, right? So here is how many of you get your news from television still, right? Television, anyone? Television? Yeah, okay, not bad. TV is still with us, right? What does this say? Is that we interact with the world and we receive messages in different ways. If you saw what I saw some unique hands going up, right? And so marketers and advertisers who are effective understand that you cannot just communicate an important message one way, through one channel, but that you have to communicate it in multiple ways and multiple channels in order for multiple people to be exposed to these messages multiple times as we go through the cadence of our life, as we go through the cadence of our day. So I had a bit of an example here that I wanted to show you, but we're not going to have time because I'm looking at the time. We may have time for it later in another presentation, but suffice it to say that if you want your message to make a dent, then you've got to place your message in a number of different, you've got to transmit your message through a number of different channels so that the same person can see it on their way to work, can see it on their computer screen when they get to work, can see it in the paper that evening, can see it in a number of different places. That's what we call the media mix. Evangelism 101, ladies and gentlemen, reality check. It is not enough to simply send out a handbill in the mail and even begin to think that we can be successful with that approach, right? It requires a media mix. Okay, so where does all this go? Because this is probably the most important part. What is the result? So those were the three principles: having a unique selling proposition. And then the second one was, can anyone remember? Crickets, reach and frequency, thank you. And then our third one, the media mix. Where does all this result in? It results in my favorite advertising and marketing concept of all time, and that is called an evoked set. In order for us in the last couple of minutes that we have to generate the meaning for this word, I need one person up here on stage. It's not going to be embarrassing. who is a car enthusiast, an auto enthusiast, right? Somebody who really likes cars, somebody who really, really, really likes autos. I'm just going to ask you one question. One question, one person, an auto enthusiast. There's a person on the back row. Come on up and grab this microphone. Check, check, 1, 2. Wonderful. Come on up on the stage so the cameras can see you. So here is the question without even thinking. Name for us here 3 kinds of cars, make and model. 3 kinds.
Ford Focus.
Correct.
Ford Mondeo.
And number 3?
Volkswagen Beetle.
Absolutely. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. JC, thank you for coming up and give him a hand. What he's just done is, without even thinking, he has rattled off 3 makes and models of cars. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that it was pure coincidence and a pure accident that he was able to think of those 3 cars? Yes or no? No. What happened there is he was able to evoke out of his memory, right, 3 kinds of cars because those advertisers put millions and billions of dollars and pounds and euros into advertising those cars in an effective way to you over the many, many, many years that you have been exposed to these things. The evoked set is one of the most powerful things in marketing. In other words, if you ask a person to name 3 of whatever kind it is, those 3 that come up to the surface of your mind without even thinking, those 3 have been the most successful in terms of marketing advertising for you. And so where we want to be as marketers and as advertisers is in the evoked set of a person. Let me ask you a question. A couple moves to a neighborhood, and after a while, they start hunting for a church. Now, you realize that most other Christians, especially in the States, are not going to go to simply their own faith community. They're going to experiment. They may be a Methodist for a couple years, and they'll go to the Presbyterian church. Let me ask you this. As they're talking around the table 7 months after they've moved into a neighborhood, and the wife says to the husband, we should start attending church. Do you think the husband, in most cases, would ever say, well, I can think of 2 or 3, but one that really comes to mind, evoked said, is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And then names a whole bunch of compelling reasons why he believes that they ought to start attending the church. The evoked set, one of the most powerful things, and I think our time is up. Thank you so much. That is Advertising 101. Remember, old school is still in session. Thank you.